Mindful Coach podcast. So welcome to this edition of the Mindful Coach podcast. I'm your host, Brett Hill, founder of the Mindful Coach Association. I'm really excited today to talk with Janet Livingston, who I became aware of her work in executive leadership and development, and now her work is informed by working with psychedelics as well. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. So welcome to the show, Janet.
Thank you, Brett. It's so nice to be here with you.
Thank you. I want to just give a little bit of a blurb about her work to kind of set the context here. She's a master facilitator, executive coach, and leadership learning program architect. She spent 8 years at Boeing no less, developing leadership programs for over 1,000 aviation leaders in China and India. And before that, she was an independent executive coach and consultant in communications and team performance. And currently, her coaching is enhanced by a study of psychedelic medicine, as well as internal family systems. Wow, you put those together, then you've really got an interesting combination of skills. And so these are what she calls two powerful avenues for healing and improving mental health. It's been the focus of her career for a while now. So I want to hear all about this, Janet. So how did you first get involved with, leadership development at all? Like, how was it that you wound up on that track?
Well, I began as a program manager and for a big NGO. And the NGO had offices worldwide. And at a certain point, they understood that those offices needed to become much more sort of self-standing, independent, and make themselves sustainable. And in order to do that, they needed to go through a strategic planning process. And since I wrote the grant that covered that process for them, I got to deliver or go over and facilitate in Kenya and Zambia and some other places that process of them doing strategic planning. So I was in a room for 2 days with the, leaders from a local health office that were rolling out. They were rolling out like major HIV programs, HIV prevention and child health programs. And that experience led me to facilitate more, which morphed into me becoming basically a trainer. Mm-hmm. And then it's kind of a longer road. Then separately, I understood that when I would, have conversations with some of my friends over coffee, that they were somehow experiencing me as therapeutic, because they would send me texts after I got home like, God, I feel so much better.
So much better.
You helped me so much. And I was like, what are you talking about? All I did was drink a cappuccino. And it hit me. Yeah, it hit me like, oh, actually, I guess these people are not used to being listened to somehow.
Well, exactly, right? And so here you show up and you're actually paying attention and they're going, this feels great.
Exactly, right? And add to that, so I'm big into intercultural competence. And so I lived in Central Europe for 16 years.
Oh my!
And these experiences,
may I ask what part of Central Europe?
In Slovakia, which is former Czechoslovakia, right? So in the capital, Bratislava. Yeah, which, by the way, is really close to Vienna. A lot of people don't know that, but it's right in the middle.
That is interesting.
Of Europe.
If we could push pause on here and have another podcast, I'd love to hear all about how that cultural embeddedness, kind of did it, cause some reframing in the way you engage with people?
Yeah, but, we can plan that. We can plan that for later, Brett.
Okay, so continue, please.
Yeah, so what I wanted to say around that, the reason I'm talking about Slovakia is that Slovakia is the sort of culture where people communicate. They're used to communicating in a certain way verbally on an everyday basis. So they often speak to each other at the same time. They interrupt each other a lot. They're very much about advising, telling. There's quite a lot of judgment. And this is common. I mean, most cultures we have this piece. It's fairly strong, right?
I think I've seen that around.
Yeah, right? You have these behavioral norms. And For me, what was really hard about living there was that, everyone for me was a sentence finisher. I would start and they would finish.
Mm.
And that was difficult. And so I guess for my girlfriends to be able to talk to me and not have me interrupt them and not tell them, "What are you, crazy? You can't do that." Like for them, that was, I guess, liberating.
I
So then I was
see.
getting these reactions to people and I realized, oh, maybe I should do something with this. So then I went and I got certified as a coach.
Nice.
That's the
Any
story. So
particular modality? Do you mind me asking if there's a?
yeah, ICF accredited program in Prague. So we had a really robust overview over 10 months of all the coaching techniques, including
Cool.
Gestalt and co-active coaching. And yeah, it was great. And so I came out of that as a certified coach, and I have an ACC credential under ICF. And yeah, so all of these pieces of my career have been put together because they're all kind of overlapping.
Hmm.
So when I became a coach, I felt more empowered to help leaders and managers, right? Because of my background in running retreats, facilitating discussions, and so forth. So now I felt like I was more in a position to help leaders and managers handle their everyday workplace issues, what they were struggling with, managing their people, right? Because coaching is also about emotions and emotional
Yes.
intelligence. Yeah, so it all kind of fit together. I'll stop
Oh,
there.
that's amazing. And so you started to do this work, and then you wound up at Boeing. I mean, that's a giant company, um, designing leadership programs for them.
Yep, I ended up at Boeing. So in 2015, I moved from Slovakia back to the US, to Seattle, where I am based. And through networking and so forth, landed in a beautiful sweet spot at Boeing under marketing and sales,
Mm.
where they had a team called the Global Strategic Initiatives Team. And that team was dedicated to providing leadership development programming and technical training programming to customers. So
Mm.
that means airlines and
Yeah.
other government partners like regulators in China. Our team was exclusively focused on China for a few years. And then
Hmm.
when COVID came, we expanded to interact with the Indian aviation audience and also some countries in Southeast Asia.
And so, what was your role in all of that?
I wore a few hats. So I began purely as a facilitator. And before COVID, we would receive groups in person from China for a week or two, sometimes even 3 weeks. And I would facilitate those programs, basically almost every day for 10 hours a day, helping
And
the
so, this
program
is
flow.
this is technical training of
Well, I was specialized in leadership development training because I'm not a technical person,
oh,
but as part of our leadership programming, we would have Boeing subject matter experts who would come in and talk about,
sure.
revenue generation, revenue management for airlines, or
Hmm.
fleet management, or
So this is
other aviation
Boeing
topics.
doing leadership development for their partners and associates and government agencies that they connect with.
Yeah, so the idea behind it was pretty simple. So when Boeing would have sales campaigns, the sales managers would go and, have their discussions and their ongoing interactions with the airlines.
Hmm.
When they got to the point where there was real interest from an airline in buying airplanes, the salespeople could include these kind of high level leadership development programming into the sales deal as an
Oh, I
extra bonus.
see.
And the Chinese airlines were
Wow.
very, very interested in this. We were lucky that they were very interested in that because it meant that they could come to us and not only be in a room with me and a bunch of Boeing subject matter experts, but they could also spend a few days at the University of Washington Foster School of Business and having like a really high level
Oh,
MBA mini course.
yeah.
And they would have the honor of visiting Boeing and going to the
Yes.
factory in
So this
Everett and
gets them
seeing where they
access
made
in
the
ways
wide
they
bodies.
couldn't otherwise get. Yeah.
Exactly. So
I see.
them it was really a big deal. In fact, the chairman of those airlines who came would personally nominate the people who got to come to our programs,
Whoa.
which is kind of mind blowing when I think about it. But so we would get sort of mid to senior level leaders. It depended on the program and the subject matter. Um, and the idea was that they would get that from us. Sometimes they would get it before buying, sometimes they would get it after buying the airplanes. And the idea was that if we upped their management skills, they would manage their airlines well, and then they
And they
would
buy more
grow.
planes.
And then we come back and buy more. Exactly, right?
It
So
makes
it's
such
a,
sense. It's like I
yeah,
love this because this is like such inside baseball.
yeah,
The world doesn't even know this kind of stuff is happening. So I just
right?
love
So
to hear
this
this
was a
kind of
really
thing.
smart strategy, I think, on Boeing's part. And it was really a win-win for, win for both sides.
I have I relate to that somewhat. I did a similar sort of role with Microsoft. I was in the Microsoft for a while. I was worldwide partner technical readiness manager for Microsoft
Wow.
Online, which is a lot of words to describe going out and training people how to use, training the companies that sell Microsoft products how to market them by showing them the cool new technical features, and
Uh-huh.
showing their value. So I have a little bit of a resonance with, yeah, okay, so we're going to go out and enable our partners to do well so that we can buy more product. And um, very interesting stuff. So you're not working at Boeing now, is that correct?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
left Boeing. That's correct.
And so now you're on your own and you're still doing a coaching business, and somehow or another, your practice got, as you say, informed by, psychedelics and the people that might be interested in those. So that's a very kind of seems like that's like on the other side of the Grand Canyon. So help us build a bridge here. How that show up for you?
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it's on the other side of the Grand Canyon, but it's actually it's a trail that's a little bit
It's just a
farther away that's
parallel
also
trail.
going
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Thanks for the great metaphor. Yeah, so I have my own independent practice now as a leadership development person and executive coach. And I got interested in psychedelics because it started popping up kind of in the news. And I had a couple of friends who started to experiment with mushrooms. And I had met somebody who was looking to develop a startup to help psychotherapists understand more
Oh,
about
interesting.
psychedelics. So I really started to feel interested because the potential of psychedelics for healing as a kind of modality, like a parallel modality to psychotherapy, turns out to be really, really high. It's really
Hmm.
powerful. And since I come from a kind of therapeutic background, my father's a psychiatrist, psychotherapist. So I grew up with that mindset of wondering, why do people behave the way they do? What's behind it? And,
Hmm.
how can people feel better? And how can people change? These kinds of questions, even as a kid. So when psychedelics came up and I started reading a little bit about it, and I started to understand that there's a safe way to do psychedelics,
Uh-huh.
I thought, I want to know more about this. So I looked around for programs that would allow me to become educated, as well as opportunities, I will admit, to try taking psychedelics.
Well, sure.
And I found a program called the Vital program, which is under the organization called Psychedelics Today. It's a 12-month program, and I'm just at the end of it now. We're just finishing. I gave my final presentation just actually yesterday.
And the program is,
It's yeah.
what's the program?
The program is called Vital, and it's psychedelics basically from A to Z. So it's comprehensive education about what psychedelics is, what the medicines are, where plant medicines come from, what the traditions are
I
from
see.
indigenous peoples, through what the neuroscience shows about the psychedelics effect on the brain, through psychotherapy aided by psychedelics through retreat facilitation, sitting, everything. It's just huge amounts of knowledge. This is a year study. Most people who experiment with psychedelics do it recreationally,
Yeah.
right? That's been going on for decades, even centuries.
Mm-hmm.
But right now, what's being developed is a much more kind of integrated, safe, therapeutic approach to
Mm-hmm.
using psychedelics of all kinds for various mental health problems, which are very widespread: depression, anxiety, PTSD, even maybe OCD. There are all kinds of discoveries that are happening. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
exciting.
It's
Also,
true.
from a medical standpoint, it's really
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah.
The research on this is coming out rapidly, and there does seem to be, from what I've read, because I love to read research because I'm a technical guy and I like the science behind this stuff. Um, it does seem to be pretty promising, and already there's some substantial evidence. And this is hard evidence from hospitals and psychiatric
Yeah.
field.
Yeah. There's research happening in many countries across the globe. Very, really important research happening here, happening in the UK, in Australia, in Germany, in Israel, I believe, in many places. There are quite a lot of people around who've heard lots about psychedelics and who are curious and want to try, but they feel uncertain. They don't know how it's going to feel. They don't know if it's going to feel safe for them. They
Sure.
don't know what effect it's going to have on them. And so I really want to offer people like that an opportunity to go through a process with me that would also be guaranteed and informed by a psychotherapist that I would work with, right?
Oh, I see.
I don't pretend to be qualified as a medical person to deal with, deal with crises, but there's a kind of a way to vet people, right?
Sure.
To
Right.
have conversations with them up front about their history, their medical history, and
Because not
their
everyone is a good candidate
mental
for
health
this.
history. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody is a good candidate. And for different reasons. A lot of people take antidepressants, and
Mm-hmm.
for example, they're not good candidates to have a real psychedelic journey. I mean, real in the sense of a really active, intense experience, because the antidepressants act on the same neurotransmitters as the psychedelics do. So the psychedelics
Mm-hmm.
will not have the desired effect on somebody who's actively taking antidepressants on a regular basis. Somebody like that would have to wean themselves off their medication first and then have a psychedelic experience. So
And that could, for the people who are listening, because, we have listeners all over the place, what about the legal concerns around this? What would you advise people to do if they're interested, but they're not certain if this is okay where they are?
well, it's mostly, I'm working specifically with psilocybin so far.
Mm.
And I'm looking at working with ketamine. Ketamine is completely legal. There are a number of ketamine clinics in Washington state, which are working to help people with their mental health. Um, Psilocybin mushrooms, right? That psilocybin is the active psychedelic substance in mushrooms, is decriminalized in Seattle for the purposes of enabling research that's happening around, including at the University of Washington. And
Sure.
preparation, which consists of basically having a coaching session or two or three. Recommended three is ideal, to understand what their concerns are if they have concerns, what they hope to achieve, what their intentions are if they want to talk about specific intentions for their journey,
Mm-hmm.
and then to help them in what the psychedelic community calls integration.
Yeah.
which so what's your understanding of the word integration, Brett? I want to ask you because there are many understandings of it.
The notion of integration?
Yeah,
Well,
psychedelic integration.
psychedelic integration. Well, I think
Yeah.
it's kind of the same for non-psychedelic integration in the sense that neurologically, your brain requires that you make sense of any experience that you have. And so if somebody just jumps up out of the street and starts, saying you're Satan or starts being mean to you, you walk away from that experience in some way. You have to make sense of it, even though it's kind of illogical and unreasonable. They're a crazy person, but you don't know what's really going on. But your brain requires that you make sense so that you can have a coherent notion of your world. Now, when you toss in a psychedelic into the biology of your system and you have an I'm going to call it out of band experience, meaning it's not a normal experience. Your brain struggles mightily sometimes to make sense out of that so that it can incorporate the experience into a framework that you can be comfortable with. Some of these experiences, in my experience, are so big that they kind of break your rules about what is so. And they require a significant readjustment about your worldview and who you are in order to accommodate. So you get a little bit bigger in an ideal world. And in some cases, they can be fairly challenging to integrate, depending on how rigid you are and how big the experience is. So that's kind of my tabletop summary.
Your tabletop summary is brilliant.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very much. Yeah, the idea of integration it's complicated. And even if you ask a psychedelic expert, well, what really is integration? You'll get, you'll get a different answer with each person you speak to. But you described it really well. That, our human inclination is to want to make sense of things that happen to us, to want to interpret them somehow. And with psychedelics, since they work on parts of the brain that can be normally sort of subconscious. We're not conscious of all of what's happening inside our heads, right? That makes it extra challenging. And so for me, given my study with the Vital program and my own experience journeying with psychedelics, the best approach to integration that I currently know of is to approach it from several different angles. To do the sort of verbal narrative kind of coaching thing. So what did you see? And, does it remind you of something? And what can you describe the visuals you had? And do you assign any meaning to that? And, what part of you came up, if we're going to talk about IFS maybe in a moment.
Right.
But that's only a piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of what happens to us during a psychedelic journey can be somatic, can be
Exactly.
body centered, right? So and so much visual and enhanced auditory, right, with music. So
Right.
really other pieces of integration include expression through art, and that can be super useful close to the experience. So when you come down and maybe a half an hour later you sit down to draw, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the drawing can be, a lot of people come with, spontaneous, beautiful, very expressive things, right?
Yeah.
Even and movement. So
I love
dancing,
that.
free dancing to music, um, any other kind of movement that feels good, that feels needed. For me, it's very important to allow the person to really do what calls them,
Yeah.
do what they
Exactly.
feel is going to help them. And you can give them ideas if they feel stuck. You can say, well, hey, we can do this, and you can do it with them. There are all kinds of ways you can help somebody. And then as the days and weeks pass, it's great to have check-ins. It
Yes.
depends on how many the client is willing to have or would like, but
Mm-hmm.
to have, sessions to do more verbal more verbal stuff. And this is kind of where the application of the ISF modality of psychotherapy, the internal family systems therapy, can be really useful. Needs.
That sounds really powerful, particularly to facilitate. Sometimes I think of it just like energy that wants to move, and and that there's in my background's in Hakomi, and there's a thing they call organicity. That there's an intelligence in our system that knows what it needs if you just get out of the way and let it do what it wants to do. And so I love very much what you say about let happen what support spontaneous emergence is the way I think Ron Kurtz would have said it back in the day. Whatever wants to occur spontaneously, and just say yes to that. Yeah.
Yes, spontaneous emergence. And so for me, this is what distinguishes psychedelic integration coaching from the classic kind of executive coaching that we learn. Executive coaching is more, it's more formulaic. It's a little bit more directive in that we attempt to establish a goal with the, right? We ask the client for a goal up front, and then we will return to the goal somewhere in the middle to check in. So how are we doing, now as opposed to when you began, all this kind of stuff. Whereas from my study of psychedelics, let me qualify, from what I've done and studied, the spontaneous emergence approach for people who are doing psychedelic work is more effective, right? Because there's all manner of complicated and beautiful or disturbing things that come up from the subconscious, right? So we're dealing with experiences that are far more intense, that are it's very different. So the idea of holding space that we learn as executive coaches has to be greatly expanded and becomes really the key element. It becomes far more important than asking powerful questions, right?
Which is true. It's way
the second
past
pillar
that.
of coaching. Yeah. So if you take executive coaching or any kind of coaching, the two basic most important pillars are active listening, deep listening. As a coach, this is what we do, right? We listen deeply and we ask powerful questions. But asking powerful questions can, if you do it too much with somebody who's coming off psychedelics, it can be invasive.
Oh, right. You go, because they go all the way in, whereas most people are just hearing the words and then the subconscious kind of responds with well, I feel a little funny about that. But when all of that neural structure that's normally there isn't present, it's just like, boom, it's a depth charge that goes farther, harder, faster than you were planning.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think the key here is really to get experience.
Yes.
To get experience doing psychedelics yourself, to really understand what it means to have a consciousness raising moment.
Yeah.
And
so
not just once.
I want to interrupt you right there because I want to just blow that up a little bit. To have a consciousness raising moment. What do you think that means?
So there are many people who have described their psychedelic journeys. They've had, the spectrum is very large. Some people who do higher doses of psychedelics experience what's known as ego dissolution. I personally have not experienced that, but the stories about it are that one ceases to feel one's own individuality as an ego, as a person, and becomes part of the cosmos, becomes part of a much greater whole. Yeah. Yes. So imagine, what you have to be mentally stable and grounded enough to be able to handle an experience like that,
Yes.
right? That's why people who do serious journeys need to be vetted for mental health
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
conditions. But so that's the peak experience. And up to that, there are any number of experiences where one can tap into old memories that have been suppressed, right? That is a form of consciousness raising. You're seeing something that's inside yourself that you would never have been able to see without psychedelics.
And also in ways that you know it's there. It's alive in dimensionalities in ways that might sound frightening to some people, but it presents in like I mentioned before in a way that the organism can relate to. So we need to head towards the end gate here. So I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you, what would you say to coaches or others out there who are interested in learning how to facilitate like you have? What would you, and realizing that people are in different states with different sorts of resources, where would you have them go? What would you tell them how to begin?
Well, I would definitely recommend taking the long-term approach. I mean, it takes time. It really, really does. And everybody says that up front, and you might think, yeah, come on, it can't be that complicated. You take the drug
Oh,
and you have an experience and someone helps you with it. No, there's really a lot to learn from, you know, philosophy, through history, through medicine, through psychology and psychotherapy and facilitation techniques and all this kind of stuff. So it's a lot. So I really recommend, if you're serious about it, find a program that you're willing to take. They can be expensive. Some of them offer
mhm.
scholarships. So it's good to sort of investigate all of them. Taking a program is absolutely legal, right? It doesn't involve taking a drug that may be illegal in your state.
Mhm.
And then there are places where you can go for retreats where you can have guided experiences
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
an environment where it's fully legal. Costa Rica, Jamaica, parts of Colorado, or maybe Colorado in general, I believe.
What about
Um,
Washington State?
there are Washington State. There are cities where it's decriminalized. Oh,
We want to be clear that we're not advising anybody to do something that's illegal,
no,
and
absolutely,
we would advise people to just look up the rules in your area and see what they are and
absolutely become
abide by
informed.
them, and then find ways to educate yourself that make sense for you.
Yeah,
And that might mean you have to travel. It might mean doing online services and all that. So
absolutely.
so.
Yeah, the course I'm taking is online, and it's
Mhm.
been hugely valuable.
So that's another way people can go. How can people reach you if they want to connect with you and find out more about your work?
Yeah, so they can reach out to me. I have a new website that's under construction.
Perpetual
It
reconstruction.
doesn't exist yet.
Right.
Uh, Under construction. So I'm directing people to my current website, which will be the old one, and that is cultureiskey.coach. That's
Okay.
one word, cultureiskey.coach. They can also email me at janet@cultureiskey.coach. And you can find me on LinkedIn under my full name, Janet Livingstone. I'm based in Seattle. I believe there's more than one Janet Livingstone on LinkedIn, which is interesting. There's a nurse in
Yeah,
Australia.
right.
Yeah,
We'll put
here
all
her
this in the
email
show
is
notes
Janet.
too, so people don't need to write it
Yeah,
down. But
yeah.
so people
Please
can
reach
find.
out if you want to
Yeah.
talk. If you're interested in classic executive coaching, anyone in the audience listening today, I'm continuing to do my classic leadership development and executive coaching work side by side because both are just endlessly interesting to me and I believe that they are important. So,
have you. So thanks again. And so for listeners, check out the show notes, connect with Janet. If you're a coach or helping professional who values mindfulness in your life, check out the Mindful Coach Association. You can list your services there for absolutely free, because I'm a crazy person and I put this website up and I decided we want to elevate all the coaches in the world who are trying to do good work. It doesn't cost you a dime, and people can find your work there. So thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
Brett, you're not a crazy person. You're a generous, good heart.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. The Mindful Coach Podcast is a service of the Mindful Coach Association.